Revealing the invisible battle, the incredible biblical story of God's redemption exposed, in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, when the shadow of the Babylonian Empire loomed, the Persian Empire flourished under King Ahasuerus, who reigned from India to Kush. His palatial halls in Susa dazzled with gold and gemstones, an extravagant display of his power and wealth. There, the air thickened with the scents of roasted lamb and fine wines, while nobles indulged in revelry, yet beneath the feasting lay a sinister darkness. Unbeknownst to many, the fate of the Jewish people teetered on the brink of destruction. Among them was a young Jewish woman named Esther, her beauty shining like the morning sun, raised by her cousin Mordecai after losing her parents. She lived in the radiant palace, surrounded by lavish luxuries, but deep within her heart, she held the secret of her heritage, a precious truth buried yet pulsing with the weight of destiny. But as fortunes shifted within the palace walls, a wicked scheme unfurled, a plot devised by Haman, the king's chief advisor, whose ambition burned fiercely, fueled by the disdain he held for Mordecai when the latter refused to bow dully before him. Manipulating the king with deceptive words, Haman orchestrated an edict to annihilate all Jews across the empire, a decree that was sealed with the king's own signet ring, marking not only a stroke of injustice but a blood-curdling reality. An invisible cloud of doom loomed ominously, casting a pall over Susa and beyond as Mordecai, stricken with grief, donned sackcloth and ashes. His public display of mourning reverberated throughout the city, a clarion call for urgent action. In this time of desperation, Mordecai reached out to Esther, urging her to approach the king, to risk her life for their people. "Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the Jews," he conveyed, the weight of his words sinking deep into her soul. The enormity of what lay ahead gripped Esther with fear. How could she dare approach the king uninvited? Yet, Mordecai's voice resounded, a reminder of her calling. "Perhaps you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this." Before we continue with this incredible biblical account, I want to make sure you don't miss any of these powerful scripture stories. Click the bell icon and select all notifications. These biblical narratives have transformed countless lives throughout history. If God's word through this story is blessing you, please like and share with someone who needs to hear about God's faithfulness today. Tell me in the comments, which biblical story has most impacted your faith journey? I'm always amazed how God's word speaks to hearts across generations. Now let's continue with what the Lord did next. With newfound resolve, Esther commanded fasting from all Jews in Susa for 3 days. Clothed in royal garments that glimmered like her heart's courage, she prepared to cross the threshold into the king's presence. Would her beauty and the grace of heaven protect her? The echo of her heartbeat thundered with the weight of lives depended upon her plea. As she approached the throne room, a holy stillness enveloped her. Would the king extend his golden scepter in mercy? What would unfold in this pivotal moment? The vastness of her purpose hung in the air, shrouded in divine mystery, poised for revelation, inviting every spirit to witness a miraculous unfolding of God's redemptive plan. Esther stood at the threshold of the throne room, her heart racing within her chest. The air was pregnant with tension, the opulent surroundings overshadowed by the peril of her mission. She took a deep breath, her palms clammy, as she gripped the edges of her royal robe. With each step forward, she felt the weight of the world upon her shoulders, her people's fate intertwined with her courage. As she entered, King Ahasuerus reclined upon his majestic throne, adorned with splendor that dazzled the eye. The lords and dignitaries around him faded from her view, for all her attention was fixated upon the king's countenance, a reflection combining power and authority. She trembled inwardly. Moments like this were fraught with consequence. Would he receive her? Would he spare her life? Ahasuerus glanced up and saw her, his seemingly indifferent expression shifting into one of surprise. The golden scepter rested gracefully upon his knee, an emblem of mercy and royal favor. "What is it, Queen Esther?" His voice rolled out like thunder across the marble floor, echoing in Esther's heart. "What is your request?" "It shall be given to you, even to the half of my kingdom." In that moment of profound grace, courage surged through Esther's veins, prompting her to fall to her knees, her face to the ground. She whispered, "If it pleases the king, let my life be granted me at my request, and my people at my petition. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated." A puzzled furrow creased the king's brow as he leaned closer, drawn into the urgent depth of her words. Who is he, and where is he, who has dared to do this? Ahasuerus' voice grew colder, layered with an ominous tone. Esther, emboldened by the Spirit of the Lord, pointed a trembling finger toward Haman, who stood among the nobles, newly adorned with arrogance. A foe and enemy, this wicked Haman, she declared, her voice gaining strength. He has plotted against my people, to write against us in the annals of the empire. Gasps erupted within the chamber. Haman's face drained of color as realization dawned upon him. The edict he had secured was not only a path of his ambition but now a snare of divine consequence. The room trembled with shocked disbelief, the very fabric of the king's court hanging in the balance. With a swift motion, Ahasuerus rose, his countenance tight with fury, for he had been filled with rage against Haman. "Take him away, and let him be hanged upon the gallows that he has prepared for Mordecai." The command echoed like a death knell, sealing Haman's fate with a divine stroke of vindication. Esther breathed a heavy sigh, relief washing over her as the walls of darkness began to crumble. Her heart swelled with hope as she felt the stirring of deliverance. The edict was revoked, the Jewish people were granted a day of defense. Yet, unknown to her, the battle of faith was far from over. As word spread throughout Susa, the echoes of the king's decree rippled beyond its walls. But there remained an unseen enemy, a greater war waged in the heavens, fraught with deeper spiritual significance. What would the ultimate end of God's plan be? For Esther, a beautiful pawn in the hand of providence, was yet to know that even her courage came with a price, a faith journey intertwined with divine purpose, destined to reveal further hints of the Lord's overarching plan of redemption. And in the shadows lingered awaited revelations, the promise of God's sovereign hand overseeing all circumstances, guiding toward the decisive culmination of faith against the unseen oppressor. As Haman was taken from the king's presence, a silence fell over the court like a shroud, heavy with dread and expectation. The nobles exchanged glances, their hearts gripped by the turn of fate. The king, still brimming with righteous fury, demanded that the edict against the Jews be annulled and that word be sent throughout the provinces, prophesying the people's defense on the day designated for their destruction. Esther rose slowly from her prostrate position, her spirit both relieved and still burdened as she turned her gaze to Ahasuerus. "If it pleases the king," she implored, "let it be written that the Jews may gather and defend themselves against their foes." The palace reverberated with her words, as every ear strained to grasp the entirety of her request. Ahasuerus nodded, understanding the weight of her plea. "Write with the king's name," he commanded the scribes, "and seal it with the king's signet ring, for a decree sealed cannot be revoked." Thus, the very name of Haman was blotted out by the quills of loyal scribes, a testament to the sovereign hand of God at work. In another part of Susa, Mordecai, ever watchful and faithful, received word of the king's edict. His heart leaped with hope upon hearing that the Jewish people would have a chance to defend themselves. He was no longer to be a mere spectator in the unfolding drama but a key part of the divine plan that was wrought in the heavens above. Yet, the air remained tinged with foreboding. Haman, stripped of his pride, was not yet finished. As he prepared for his end upon the gallows he had constructed for Mordecai, fury and vengeance brewed within him. The plots of men could change, but the machinations of evil are often relentless in their pursuit. Meanwhile, the news spread among the Jewish people, hope was rekindling in their hearts as they took refuge in prayer. They gathered in secret, petitioning the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob for protection, for it is written, "The effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much," James 5 verse 16. Their cries ascended like incense before the throne of grace, seeking deliverance from the shadow of death descending upon them. Esther stood alone in her chamber that night, the weight of her newfound role as champion pressing heavily upon her soul. She understood the gravity of what lay ahead, not only would she face the king again, but her life would be a testament to the faith of her people. For such a time as this, a whisper echoed in her spirit, rooting deep within as she contemplated her choices. But the spiritual struggle raged on, unseen yet potent, for Haman had allies still, men stirred by envy and greed, willing to fan the flames of discontent. As the decree was proclaimed, onlookers remained fearful, for the darkness that sought to consume the Jewish heart was relentless. What would be the ultimate resolution of God's providential plan? The question lingered in the air, riding upon the winds of expectation. Would Esther's courage catalyze the salvation of her people, or would the unseen forces of evil quench hope before it could blaze? The stage was set for a clash not merely of royal power but of divine intention hidden beneath the surface of earthly affairs, beckoning all to witness the unfolding of God's redemptive story. In the tapestry of adversity woven through courage, a greater revelation awaited. The time had come for divine intervention, yet darkness had not finished its design. How would God weave these strands into his sovereign fabric, preparing for a glorious conclusion and the fulfillment of promises yet unspoken? In the days following the proclamation, the hearts of the Jewish people pulsed with renewed vigor. Mordecai, filled with a spirit of unity, summoned the leaders of the Jewish community in Susa. "Gather, my brethren," he urged them, "for we must strengthen one another. The decree has been issued, and the day of our deliverance has drawn near." As they assembled, a great burden of prayer filled the room, saturated with cries unto God. Each petition rose like a fortress against the lurking shadow, invoking divine guardianship. "O Lord of hosts," they cried, "protect us in this time of peril. Remember your covenant with our forefathers, for your promises endure forever." Esther prepared herself for her next appearance before the king. She adorned herself in royal attire, yet her heart was clothed in humility. "Gracious God," she whispered, "may my words be sweet as honey and my approach be as righteous as the prayers of our people." She steeled her resolve to speak truth before the king, even at the risk of her life. On the morrow, with a heart pounding like thunder in her chest, Esther entered the king's hall, the opulence of his court shining around her like clouds of glory. The eyes of Ahasuerus fell upon her, an unspoken question flickering in his gaze. "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your petition?" he asked, his expression softening. Esther approached with reverence, hands trembling slightly. "If it pleases the king," she began, her voice steady despite the quaking of her soul, "I have prepared a banquet, and I invite you and Haman to join me." The invitation was laden with unspoken intention, as she sought to draw out the enemy in a moment of revelation. Haman, unaware of the divine trap set before him, strutted with arrogance, reveling in the honor bestowed upon him. When the day of the banquet arrived, he delighted in the king's company while Esther held her secret, a lifeline to her people and a dagger poised to pierce the veil of evil. As they feasted, Esther's heart wrestled within her, the weight of her burden gnawing at every bite. At last, emboldened by the Spirit of God, she turned towards Ahasuerus. "My lord, I have found favor in your sight, and I carry a heavy plea for my people. For we have been sold to destruction." The king's countenance shifted, and confusion swept over him. Who would dare do such a thing? He demanded, fire rising in his voice as the mortal danger unfolded before his eyes. Pointing to Haman, she declared, "This wicked man, my lord, has set himself against us in bitterness and hatred. It is he who conspired to annihilate my people." The room fell into a hushed stillness, as the weight of betrayal hung in the air, and the true nature of the plot was unveiled. Haman's face blanched, the color draining from him as if the very life was being stripped away. In the depths of his heart, he felt the tides of despair rising, the walls of his own malice closing in upon him. As he turned for mercy towards the queen, desolation etched its mark upon his brow. Ahasuerus, seething with rage, rose from his throne. "What is to be done with this man?" he thundered, as the anger of a sovereign met the cunning of a conspirator. The king's guards moved swiftly, seizing Haman and binding him. Yet even in the chaos, whispers of divine providence coursed through the hearts of the faithful. The people of Israel pressed into prayer, eyes gazing heavenward, longing for God's hand to deliver them. Their voices echoed through the streets of Susa. O God, we trust in your unfailing promise, may our deliverance come from your mighty hand. And as darkness clashed with light, the divine tapestry wove tighter, revealing that the true battle was not merely of flesh and blood, but of obedience and redemption. God's purpose, hidden until this very moment, began to unfurl, casting shadows to flight. But outside the palace walls, Haman's allies conspired, their desperate hearts refusing to acquiesce. The forces of darkness were relentless, yet God's design remained unthwarted. How would the final act play out in this divine drama? The echoes of prophecy still lingered in the air, waiting for the moment when God would declare his faithful love and unfurl his sovereign will. In the aftermath of Esther's grave revelation, Ahasuerus, his heart heavy with anger and betrayal, turned to his advisers, demanding justice be served. "Prepare the gallows for this wicked man," he commanded, his voice echoing like thunder through the chamber. Haman's downfall had begun in earnest, yet the enemies of Israel conspired in hushed corners, rallying their strength against the tide of divine intervention. As night enveloped the city, a profound darkness settled in the hearts of the conspirators. Haman, now a captive of his own treachery, could only watch as he was led away. His mind raced with desperate schemes, but all the while Esther remained steadfast in her spirit. "O God," she prayed silently, "may your plan unfold according to your divine timing, and grant us courage in this hour." Meanwhile, the king, troubled and unable to sleep, commanded that the records of his reign be brought before him. As the scrolls were read, recounting the deeds of Mordecai, a memory flickered in the shadows of his mind. "What honor has been bestowed upon this man?" he asked, confusion alight in his eyes. The attendants replied, "None has been given to him, my lord." The king, his senses attuned to righteousness, determined that this must change. Just then, as the dawn broke, Haman was summoned from the dungeon, a figure of despair bound in chains. He entered the king's chambers, his former pride reduced to nothing, yet he had no idea that he was about to become the instrument of God's ultimate plan. "A wicked man seeks dark ends against my queen," Ahasuerus declared, his gaze piercing through Haman's spirit. "What should be done to honor a man who has saved the life of the kingdom?" Haman, thinking he was the esteemed figure named, began to outline his own glorification, entwined in vain hope, let royal robes be brought forth, and let him ride upon the king's horse. His pride spiraled higher, a false canopy over a heart wrought with malice. But as Haman's words echoed, the king interjected. "Get the robes and the horse, go at once and do all this for Mordecai, the Jew." With each order, Haman's heart sank deeper into despair, shame intermingling with fear. The gallows he had prepared for Mordecai were now ironically sharpened against his own fate. In an agonizing display of irony, Haman was forced to lead the horse through the streets, proclaiming, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." The laughter of the city rang hollow in his ears, an echo of failed ambitions as God's hand moved unseen. Esther, from within the palace, sensed the shift in the air around her. Empowered yet humble, she gathered the people once more, inviting them into the sacred space of prayer and fasting. "Let not your hearts be troubled," she proclaimed. "For the Lord fights for us." They unified their voices in an anthem of praise, calling upon the God who delivers. But outside these walls, the enemies of the Hebrews plotted with a bitter resolve, clutching to their grievances against God's chosen. Darkness whispered among them, casting veils over intentions, blinded by their hatred. Yet a truth loomed large in the cosmos, as heaven watched with bated breath. As the shadows of calamity drew nearer, Mordecai, restored and honored, joined Esther in rallying their kin, for they recognized the darkness was not merely of man, but infused with spiritual fervor. "We will not falter," he declared, emboldened by divine purpose. "For we are a people called by his name." In the palace, the tension of the impending confrontation thickened. For Haman, fate was sealing itself, a dark destiny drawing near. The hearts of the watchful turned toward Susa, where God's plan was being intricately woven into the fabric of their very existence. And thus, the stage was set for the ultimate revelation of God's sovereignty. The time had come for the reckoning of evil and the exaltation of the righteous. But what lay in store for Haman in the face of divine justice? What would be the final word in this grand narrative of salvation? The threads of destiny were drawing tighter, and answers awaited in the echoing silence before the storm. Esther, sensing the winds of change, gathered her courage and approached the king once more, her heart a vessel of both trepidation and hope. In the chamber where she had once unveiled her perilous truth, now lay the weight of a nation upon her shoulders. "King Ahasuerus," she began, her voice steady yet reverent, "if I have found favor in your sight, let my request be known. Spare my life, and the lives of my people, for we are marked for destruction." The king, astounded by her fervor and insight, demanded, "Who dares to harm you, my queen? Speak boldly." With a heart filled with faith, Esther revealed the face of their enemy. "It is Haman, the very man who plots against us. He seeks to annihilate the Jews, your servant Mordecai and myself among them." Ahasuerus was struck with rage, the color draining from his face as realization sunk in. "Bring forth this wicked man," he commanded, his voice like the roar of a lion, instilling fear in the hearts of those present. As Haman was brought before the king, dread consumed him. Awareness of the depth of his wickedness and impending judgment weighed heavily upon his heart. "What shall be done to him who has plotted such evil?" the king inquired, his eyes aflame with righteous fury. Haman, in a moment of self-preservation, conjured in his heart a great act of honor he wished to receive. "Let him be clothed in royal garments, let a crown be placed upon his head, and let him ride on the king's steed as the people of the kingdom shout in glory. Then do this for Mordecai the Jew." Ahasuerus thundered, his words a decree that sealed Haman's fate. The king's command fell like fire upon Haman, igniting a horror that coiled around his very soul. Humiliation awaited him, and the gallows he had fashioned for Mordecai loomed ever closer. As Haman walked the streets of Susa, leading the steed of Mordecai, he shouted the king's decree, his heart grieving, unraveling under the weight of his own design. The crowds that had once celebrated his ascendance now turned their gazes on Mordecai, honoring him as the true hero of the kingdom, the one blessed by the king's favor. Meanwhile, Esther gathered the Jewish people once more, her spirit lifting as she witnessed the power of God moving through their plight. "Let the fast continue," she instructed, "for our God is with us." United in fervent prayer, the Jews stood as one, their hearts intertwined with hopes of salvation. "We are not mere victims," she declared. "We are a people chosen by God, destined for deliverance." The plot thickened, for as Haman's fortune turned to ashes in his mouth, news spread like wildfire. The truth of his treachery would not be veiled. Soon, the entire empire would know how he sought to destroy the beloved of the Lord. The schemers in darkened corners sensed the tremors of divine authority shaking their resolve. But deep within the enemy's camp, a fear gripped the hearts of Haman's cohorts. They understood that a far greater power was at work, one that transcended their malevolent intentions. As Haman fell to his knees, pleading for mercy before Esther and Ahasuerus, the king's face turned stone cold. "Take him away. Let him meet the fate he designed for others." Just then, heaven itself seemed to pause, and all of creation held its breath, for God's divine plan of salvation was set into motion. The day of reckoning, long awaited, was finally arriving. And so the gallows awaited him, the very instrument of his destruction, piercing the skies of fate. But what final act of the Almighty would unfold in these moments of tension? Who would emerge vindicated in the sweeping tale of redemption? A promise lingered in the air, whispering of God's unyielding vengeance towards evil and his unfaltering love for his people. The prophetic threads woven through history tightened, for the time was near when God would reveal not just justice, but a testament to his eternal sovereignty and unmatched grace. As the sun dipped low over the horizon, casting a golden hue upon the palace of Susa, the atmosphere thrummed with an electric energy, an ominous prelude to the fate awaiting Haman. The king's anger surged like a mighty river ready to burst its banks. "Take him away!" Ahasuerus bellowed, a divine justice ignited in his heart. "Let him be hanged on the gallows he prepared for Mordecai." The servants who surrounded the throne were seized by a fierce resolve, their loyalty to the crown outweighing their fear of the man who had once occupied a place of honor among them. Haman, desperate and trembling, watched as the soldiers approached, their faces stern as they grasped him by his arms. "Is this how it shall end?" Haman pleaded, his voice cracking with despair. "I appeal to your mercy, O king." But the king's heart was sealed, hardened against the one who had sought to extinguish the lives of the innocent. His cries echoed through the halls, reverberating against the walls of despair until they faded into silence. The gallows stood tall, raised for the purpose of shaming the righteous, yet it was now the wicked that would face the shame. With each step, the path to justice was alive with the murmurs of a watching kingdom and a waiting God. Mordecai, who had once sat at the palace gate in mourning, now felt the sudden rush of hope swelling within him. Esther stood close by, her heart still and resolute, captivated by the ongoing revelation of God's plan unfolding before her eyes. "Do not fear, my people," she encouraged those gathered, she who had found her call in the realm of the unseen. "For we are under the canopy of his mercy, and what was meant for evil, he will turn to our good." The soldiers led Haman toward the gallows, the assembled crowd whispering among themselves, their shock mingling with anticipation. Would this be the justice not only for Mordecai but for the entire lineage of Israel? Would the attempts of the enemy be cut short by the mighty hand of the Almighty? At the execution site, the king's edict rang loud, a proclamation of deliverance that set in motion the wheels of destiny. Haman ascended the scaffold, a sight witnessed by both his followers and those he sought to destroy. The very instruments of his arrogance now became an idol of shame, haunting the air he breathed. "Lord God of Israel," Esther uttered softly, her heart affixed to the throne room of heaven, "we have fasted and prayed for such a day as this. Deliverance is ours, but let it be known that the glory belongs to you alone." And with that, an angelic choir seemed to echo in the spiritual realm, rejoicing at the decisive moment of victory. For in this drama, the unseen battle was raging, and the battle lines drawn not only between men, but between good and evil, hope and despair, life and death. Haman's fate had been sealed, but the true revelation was yet to come, for God held in his heart a greater purpose. It was not merely the end of Haman that mattered, but the beginning of a divine unraveling of God's promises to his people. As the rope was tightened, a weight born of generations hung in the air, the promise of redemption woven into the hearts of the faithful. What new mysteries lay ahead for the Jewish people? What would become of Esther and Mordecai as instruments of God's sovereign will? The air thickened, laden with questions that flickered like stars in the night sky, hints of a glorious dawn destined to break over God's chosen ones. And so, the gallows stood as a symbol, an end to Haman, yet a prologue to the awakening of a people, poised for deliverance as they awaited the unveiling of God's ultimate plan, a plan that would reverberate through the ages and leave an indelible mark on the tapestry of history. As the fatal moment approached, the heavens seemed to hold their breath, and the earth beneath trembled with anticipation. Haman, ensnared by his own treachery, stood upon the gallows, a stark reminder of the high cost of pride. The noose, coarse and unyielding, wrapped about his neck, signified not just the end of one man's ambition but the reaffirmation of a covenant made many generations past. Esther clasped her hands tightly, her heart burdened yet aflame with the hope of the Almighty. She recalled the words spoken to her at the behest of her cousin Mordecai, "Who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Esther 4 verse 14. As the legacy of her people hung in the balance, she understood that God's purpose was being unveiled, layer by layer, in a tapestry woven from both treachery and faith. The assembled crowd observed in stunned silence as the king's decree sealed Haman's fate. Overhead, the weight of despair was lifted by an unseen hand. Mordecai's heart surged with faith as Esther's voice, a voice of courage, resounded within him. beckoning all to witness the unfolding of divine justice. Suddenly, a chill swept through the air as Haman's cries resurrected from the pit of hopelessness. "O King Ahasuerus, grant me mercy. I have been deceived by Satan." But no pity remained in the eyes of the sovereign. The king's decision, fueled by a righteous fury, echoed in the stillness like thunder. "Let it be done," Ahasuerus commanded, his voice steadfast and unwavering. The soldiers, emboldened by the decree, tightened the rope further, an action that reverberated as a resounding amen to divine justice long awaited. Yet, as the darkened fate of Haman descended upon him, Esther felt a shift in the atmosphere. For every act ordained upon earth, there resided a corresponding event in heaven. Surrounded by the echoes of despair, the people prayed fervently, their whispered supplications soaring as incense before the Lord of hosts. "Father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob," Esther prayed, her spirit aflame with reverence. "You have heard our cries. You are our stronghold in times of trouble." The moment had come. Haman, once the architect of ruin, succumbed to the instruments of his own destruction. The victory belonged not to the might of men, but to the grace of the one who holds the hearts of kings in his hands. Haman's final breath signaled not only divine justice but the redemption of a people. Surrounded by those who had witnessed his downfall, there arose a murmur, transforming into a roar of acclamation. The weight of oppression began to lift, and hope surged anew within the hearts of the Jewish populace. They understood that their deliverance had just begun, for with the eradication of the adversary came the dawn of a new era. "Praise be to the God of Israel!" cried Mordecai, lifting his voice above the throng. "The Lord has vindicated us. He has turned the tides of our affliction." But even as the cries of joy resounded, the shadows of uncertainty loomed. What edict lingered in the halls of the kingdom? What remained of Haman's decree against the Jewish people? Esther and Mordecai exchanged solemn glances, the responsibility of their mission pressing heavily upon them. "For we have yet to contend with the aftermath," Mordecai warned. "Justice done must not only be proclaimed but secured. The decree against our people remains." And thus, even amid celebration, the narrative of their deliverance was not yet complete. The unseen battle raged still, and their triumph was intertwined with the covenant promises of their forefathers, promises that needed invoking even more fervently now. As hearts filled with hope, the resolute pair prepared for the unfolding of a greater purpose. How would God's sovereignty manifest through the trials yet to come? Would His power be displayed once again, reshaping the destiny of His people, as His promises ever endured? The story had just begun to awaken, and the people of Israel stood at the cusp of a revelation unlike any before, a revelation that would echo through the ages and resonate within the very fabric of their faith. After the fall of Haman, the atmosphere within the palace shifted palpably. Esther and Mordecai stood resolute, hearts pulsing with a daunting truth: the victor would still bear the burdens of their people. In the shadow of Haman's demise, a greater adversary might yet stand, for the decree of destruction remained unrevoked. How heartening it was that God had undone the wicked, but the battle for the survival of Israel was far from over. "Esther," Mordecai began, his voice steady but weighted with urgency, "you must go before the king once more. We cannot linger in celebration while our people are still in peril. The decree against us must be undone." Esther felt the burden of her role crescendo within her spirit, the echo of Mordecai's words pressing her toward action. The king's heart was perilously unpredictable. She recalled how a single plea ignited hope within her, yet fear mingled with her boldness. "But, Mordecai, to approach the king without being summoned is to invite death upon myself. Yet, as you have said, who knows whether I have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Mordecai's gaze searched hers, unwavering and filled with faith. "If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows if perhaps you have come to this royal position for such a time as this?" Esther 4 verse 14. Esther took a breath steeped in resolve. "Gather all the Jews in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." With that, she summoned her courage and sought to embody the spirit of her ancestors, reminding herself that God had never abandoned his people. With prophetic courage, she approached the threshold of the throne room. Her heart thrummed like a drum of war, yet she pressed onward, cloaked in divine purpose. As she entered, Ahasuerus lifted his eyes from his royal seat, surprise and curiosity staining his expression. "What is it, Queen Esther?" he asked, his voice reaching deeper into the chambers of power. "What is your request?" "Even to half of my kingdom, it shall be granted you." Esther's spirit surged at the king's graciousness, yet she understood the delicacy of the moment. "If it pleases the king," she replied, her voice steady yet trembling with the weight of her task, "let the king and Haman come today to a banquet that I have prepared for them." The king's curiosity was piqued. "Bring Haman to the banquet," he instructed, his frenetic mind shifting to intrigue. When they gathered, Esther served with grace, yet her heart lay heavy with the truth she must unveil. Once the banquet was underway and their hearts warmed by the wine, Ahasuerus turned to his queen. "What is your petition, Queen Esther?" "It shall be granted." With the eyes of her people hungering for hope, she revealed her truth. "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and the life of my people. This is my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated." Esther 7 verses 3-4. The air throbbed with an electric tension as the words settled into the hearts of those present. Esther's faith had stepped into the void of divine silence, and immediately, God's sovereign plan began to twist like smoke in the air, revealing threads of grace that would soon surge forth. What would unfold in the aftermath of her declaration? Would the heart of the king align with God's righteous purpose? A hidden power flickered, poised to reveal the sovereign intentions of the Almighty. What remains in store for the Jewish people as the power of the decree hung perilously on the king's response? The essence of providence was yet to reveal its full magnificence, as the orchestration of the divine played on, moving toward the redemption of an entire nation. In the aftermath of Haman's downfall, a profound stillness settled over Susa, reverberating with both dread and anticipation. The tide of triumph felt palpable among the people, yet Esther and Mordecai understood that their journey toward deliverance was not yet complete. The decree still lingered, a decree that still threatened their very existence. With unwavering determination, Mordecai summoned the Jewish leaders for an urgent meeting. "Brothers and sisters," he declared, "our victory over Haman is but a step. We must seek the king's favor to revoke the edict against us. Time is of the essence." His voice resonated with the urgency of their plight, igniting the spirits of those gathered with the fire of shared purpose. Esther, her heart aflame with the passion of her people, took her place among them. "We have fasted and prayed," she stated, her joy mingling with the gravity of their situation. "Let us continue to seek the Lord's guidance, for He is our strength." The assembly bowed their heads, lifting heartfelt prayers to the God of Israel, their cries rising like incense, a sweet aroma, fragrant before his throne. Meanwhile, King Ahasuerus, still reeling from the revelations of Esther's boldness, contemplated the fate of his kingdom. The decree he had once sealed now haunted him, for the warmth of guilt lingered like embers in the cold light of day. Solitude enveloped him in the palace, and he commanded that the royal scribes be summoned. "Let a new decree be written," he proclaimed, a deep determination in his voice. "It shall declare that the Jews are permitted to defend themselves." As the quill scratched fervently across the parchment, heaven rejoiced, the narrative of redemption surged forward. The king's mercy poured over the Jewish remnant, igniting hope where despair had threatened to overtake them. The news spread swiftly across the provinces, igniting flames of courage in the hearts of the Jewish people. "On the 13th day of the month of Adar, let us arise and defend ourselves against those who seek our end," Mordecai's voice echoed, firm and resolute. The call was answered with enthusiasm, prayers of praise flooding the heavens, and families gathered in anticipation, ready to stand against the darkness. On the fateful day, as the sun rose over Susa, a wave of readiness swept through the gates of the city. Equipped with divine purpose, the Jewish people rallied together, hearts pounding with new strength. In every home and street, a unity of spirit emerged, igniting trust in God's deliverance. The enemy trembled at the sight. Those who had long harbored malice felt a chilling awareness that the hand of God was upon his people. The battle was not simply one of flesh and blood, but a contest of faith, one which God had already won. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the confrontation began. Esther and Mordecai stood at the forefront of their people, emboldened by years of faith and fervor. "For you are not alone," they declared. "The Lord of hosts fights with us. Our covenant remains, and he shall deliver us today." The clash sounded across Susa. Each cry of courage from the Jewish warriors mingled with the echoes of history. Their victory was not merely for themselves, but a testament to an unfaltering God who responds to the cry of his chosen. As the dust settled and the clamor faded, the testimony of God's faithfulness unfolded. The Jews emerged victorious, celebrating not just their survival, but the fulfillment of God's promises, a divine protection unmatched by the schemes of man. In the weeks that followed, a festival arose, a joyous remembrance of the day deliverance came to the people who clung to their faith. Mordecai, elevated and honored, issued decrees of celebration, urging all to remember the power of prayer and the acts of God on their behalf. "Let it be celebrated as Purim," he declared, the name symbolizing both the lots cast in darkness and the joy of divine intervention. The laughter of children and the voices of elders filled the air, praises echoing as hearts turned towards heaven. Together, they rejoiced over their salvation, testifying of God's unwavering love for his people. And so, the story of Esther and Mordecai became etched in the annals of history, a lesson of courage, faith, and the reality of God's sovereignty over every dark plot. The legacy endured, a reminder that God watches over his own, ever ready to rescue those who call upon his name. May we learn from their journey, standing steadfast in the time of trial and finding our courage in the one who holds our future secure. Beloved friends, as we reflect on this incredible story of deliverance, it is crucial to stay connected to the Word of God. You need to subscribe now to stay inspired by God's truth. If this account of faith has touched your heart, leave a like now to help spread God's Word through the algorithm. Share your reflections in the comments, and let us rejoice together in how this story has transformed your faith. Don't wait even one more second. Share this powerful testimony with at least 5 friends who need to hear God's truth today, for your advocacy in spreading his word can inspire others toward redemption. Let us be witnesses of his love and grace.